Sampling and processing images under directionally varying conditions is the key to several modern visual effects techniques in digital photography and movie making. Light field imaging, for instance, captures spatial and directional scene samples simultaneously to enable digital refocusing after recording. However, if too few perspectives are captured and combined, undersampling artifacts in out-of-focus regions appear. Image-based relighting is another example that uses recordings under varying lighting directions to enable the computations of entirely synthetic illuminations of real actors or objects. Such recordings might be captured with a dome-shaped studio environment, such as a light stage, and might suffer from undersampling if too few LEDs are used. We present a first guided super-resolution technique for increasing directional resolution that does not rely on depth estimation or disparity computations. We achieve a better image quality with the same number of samples by simply realigning sampling positions according to our sampling code and by applying our guided upsampling algorithm. We have built an irregular array of 25 cameras and captured light fields with our sampling code. The recorded images are upsampled with our method to a directional resolution of 9 by 9. For comparison, we have realigned the 25 cameras on a regular 5 by 5 grid and linearly interpolated the captured images to a resolution of 9 by 9 perspectives. While the sparse light field resolution leads to strong bokeh artifacts in out-of-focus regions due to undersampling, the light fields with interpolated missing perspectives are blurred in focus regions due to image misalignment caused by interpolation. Light fields created with coded sampling and guided upsampling show clear improvements in out-of-focus and in-focus regions. This example illustrates image-based relighting results that could be achieved if our sampling code would be used for the light stage 6 instead of a uniform distribution of LEDs. In both cases, 362 LEDs are applied. However, our approach supports an effective upsampling to an icosahedron with 642 LEDs, leading to less aliasing artifacts for high-frequency lighting effects such as sharp shadows or highly specular surface reflections. Note that the presented results are simulations that approximate the conditions of the light stage 6 as close as possible. Our simulation allows a direct comparison with the ground truth. Once again, our results indicate that coded sampling and guided upsampling perform significantly better than a sparse uniform sampling or than interpolation. The biggest limitation of our directional super-resolution approach is that it fails if the disparity among neighboring samples is too large. Here we show an example of a 1D camera array where we used only 29 out of the 49 camera perspectives for guided upsampling with 4 guidance regions. The remaining 20 perspectives serve as ground truth. Note that patches to be matched are 3D rather than 4D in this example. Compared to linear interpolation, our upsampling results are better. However, they are still not sufficient for applying them for virtual camera movements, where only a single image is shown at a time. When computing integral images from multiple perspectives, minor patch matching artifacts are less critical and they are averaged by blending multiple images. We assume an input grid of u times v directional sample points. For our example, each sample point corresponds to a light field perspective of a 3 by 3 light field. The goal is to upsample the directional resolution to an output grid of 5 by 5. For guided upsampling, we consider guidance regions distributed within the sampling area. The sampling rate of a guidance region equals the desired sampling rate of the output grid. Our first step is to low-pass filter the guidance regions to simulate the sampling rate of the input grid by downsampling and subsequently upsampling the guidance again. The next step is to upsample the input grid to approximate the missing directional samples. Note that the upsampled input grid, the guidance region and the up and downsampled guidance have now the same sampling rate. We synthesize the output grid by extracting 4-dimensional neighborhood patches of the output grid and by finding the closest matches in the guidance region. The corresponding guidance patches from the guidance region and the upsampled guidance region are subtracted and added to the output grid. The subtraction corresponds to high-pass filtering the guidance patch. Thus, we add only high frequencies to the low frequencies in the output grid. Note that the patches are only comparable if they share the same sampling structure. For our example, this only applies to 4 UV coordinates. Overlapping patches are averaged and our estimations are overwritten whenever a physically captured sample is available. To avoid an unnecessary large number of samples to be recorded, we support upsampling over multiple iterations. Our iterative upsampling requires the sampling code to contain nested guidance regions with multiple sampling rates. In the first iteration, the input grid is upsampled to the next higher sampling grid. In our example, the 3x3 input grid is upsampled to a 5x5 output grid, as previously explained. In the second iteration, the 5x5 grid is upsampled to the final 9x9 output grid. For the second iteration, 16 UV coordinates share the same patch sampling structure. For automatic sampling code estimation, we assume that the target resolution as well as the maximal available number of samples are known. For our example, we desire an optimal code for a 9x9 output resolution with no more than 25 cameras. From the output grid, we first determine the maximum number of iterations by consecutive downsampling of the output grid until the grids cannot be downsampled further. For our example, 3 iterations are supported, since a grid of 2x2 cannot be further downsampled with our method. We then test how many iterations should be applied under our given constraints, starting with 1 iteration. For each iteration count, we determine how many guidance regions should be applied, starting with the largest possible number, 16 in our example. Since the number of samples in the corresponding sample code is too high, we iteratively decrease the number of guidance regions. For our example, no valid configuration can be found with a single iteration. Thus, we increase the number of iterations to 2. The maximum number of guidance for the second iteration is 4, and the guidance count is decreased iteratively until a valid configuration is found at a single guidance region. Thus, the result of our automatic code estimation is that 2 iterations and 1 guidance region are best. The shown examples illustrated how guided upsampling and code estimation can be applied to a rectangular grid. However, the same techniques are appropriate for other grid types as long as up and down sampling operations are defined. This is also the case for geodesic grids such as icosahedra, which are the underlying sampling structure for classical light stage systems. Nevertheless, one essential difference between such triangular and rectangular grids exists. Compared to rectangles, triangles can have different orientations. Patches can only be compared and matched if they share the same sampling structure, which includes the patch's orientation. Thus, for icosahedra we need guidance regions of different orientations. We presented the first guided super-resolution technique for increasing directional resolution that does not rely on depth estimation or disparity computations. Our method can significantly reduce the complexity of directional capturing systems and improve the image quality of modern visual effects production techniques used in photography and filmmaking.